The year is 1894 and police in Chicago enter a building known as the Murder Castle. That day, the cops find rooms with movable walls. They discover chutes in those rooms that lead to a basement where vats of acid could turn a human body into mush. Around the entire building are a labyrinth of corridors, some that lead nowhere. Some of the hallways contain rooms that have vents built into them, where noxious gases can be released. Down in the basement are the grisliest discoveries: an operating table where bodies have been dissected, and worse, a kind of stretching rack where one could perform the most diabolical experiments. This shocking discovery would open the floodgates to the discovery of the atrocities committed by Mr. Henry Howard Holmes, real-life Saw villain and one of America's most evil serial killers. And this is how it all unraveled. He wasn't born Henry Howard Holmes, he made that name up later in an effort to distance himself from his dastardly deeds. He was actually born with the name Herman Webster Mudgett. On May 16, 1861, he became the third child of Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodot Page Pritz, English immigrants living in New Hampshire. As a kid, he excelled in school, which landed him a place at the respectable Phillips Exeter Academy. He graduated, he took work as a teacher, he married young and had a child. This was a young man that seemed destined to live a quiet life within the middle classes of the American public. But something happened, and darkness encroached on the young man's life. Age 18, now with wife and child, he enrolled at the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. He graduated and was said to be a brilliant student, if not a person with some strange inclinations. It was while studying in the anatomy department at this university that he began his life of crime. The crimes were simple, if not macabre. He worked in the anatomy department of the college, a job that gave him access to bodies that were to be dissected. Some of those cadavers he sneaked out of the department and bashed them around a bit, making it look like they died in an accident. Prior to doing this, the young student had taken out insurance policies on those people. You'd think this would not be so easy to do, even back then, but it's alleged he committed this scam on quite a few occasions. He had cash in his pocket, a wife, and an infant child. But it seems he wasn't interested in staying settled down for long. One day, he just took off, leaving the two behind, and they would not see him again for a very long time. Just before he left, he created a highly fictitious story that he knew would get back to them. They heard from others that he'd been in some kind of train accident and lost his memory. As outlandish as it seems, it kind of worked, and such lies would work again for him in the future. He ended up in New York State, and while there, he was connected to the disappearance of a young boy. Did he kill the boy? It's now thought he did, but no one can be sure. He also tried to scam an insurance company out of $20,000 by using another cadaver he'd taken a policy out on, but this time he was caught. He was now getting quite the name for himself, so naturally, he changed his name. Herman Webster Mudgett became H.H. Holmes. It was at this point that he moved to Chicago, a place where his name would be cemented in history. He married again, illegally of course since he hadn't divorced, and he started to make plans for future scams. He made sure to marry into a wealthy family. He was obviously well-educated, well-spoken, and you could say he had the gift of gab. That's why he was always able to secure loans to buy properties. To pay those loans back, he got loans on the properties he already had. He bit off more than he could chew, but when creditors went after him, he always seemed to get himself out of the fix. One of the ways he did this was to move around a bit, and so now we come to one of the most recognized addresses in crime history, that of 63rd and Wallace Streets, where he worked as a clerk in a drugstore that was on the bottom floor. With some cunning, he managed to take it over, and once that was done, he took over much of the building. This was a massive place with rows of stores at the bottom and apartments on the third floor. Then there was a second floor where Holmes would create his house of horrors. And as you know, the basement is where the very ugly stuff went on. He was still scamming, of course, selling from his drugstore magical drinks that could allegedly stop alcoholism in its tracks. He sold a Canadian man an invention for $2,000, although the gas-making machine wasn't what it seemed. He also sold water that he said was a cure for every ailment, which was water Holmes was stealing from the water mains. Suffice to say, this man knew his way around industrial piping. This would help him later when he gassed people to death. Holmes never stopped working on his building, telling people that he was creating a hotel for the soon-to-arrive World's Fair. In truth, he was creating a monster of a building that didn't make any sense. He'd hire contractors and then fire them partway through the job. He was creating a house of many doors, landings, and rooms that just didn't look like anything anyone had ever seen. You could walk down one hallway and it would just end. Rooms had no doors. Others had trapdoors. How did he get away with not paying all the people to build his horror castle? The answer is he'd lie through his teeth. and when that didn't work, he changed the names on the ownership documents. Fictitious people owned the building, as did a fictitious company run by people that didn't exist. His mother-in-law even owned the place at one point. It was at this point in time that Holmes began killing people in that building. There was his assistant, Julia, who was with child and husband when she started working in the drugstore. She began an affair with Holmes, so her husband took off. She and her child one day went missing and were never seen again. There were other women who Holmes's wife didn't know about since she didn't live at the castle with him. Holmes could meet someone on the street, use his gift of speech to impress them, and within no time at all, found themselves staying in a weird room on the second floor. Holmes had learned a thing or two while building the monstrosity. He fitted alarms around the building, so when someone opened a door or stepped on a certain step in his room, he'd hear a bell ring. He'd then know they were on the move. Many rooms could be locked only from the outside, so when one of those rooms started to fill with poisonous gas, the occupant would not be able to get out. It's also alleged that one person was burned to death in a room whose walls had been made from fireproof material. There were other rooms that once the door had been closed, they became almost airless, so within a matter of time the victim would be suffocated. After such an event took place, Holmes could easily get the body down to the basement since the room had been fitted with a chute. Other rooms were connected to small elevators. Sometimes he might have just locked a door and let that person die of dehydration. Years later, he admitted he starved a woman in that room. When the bodies hit the dissecting table, Holmes would go to work on them. Having worked in the medical profession, he knew very well that organs and other body parts were expensive and in high demand. He would take what he wanted from the bodies and throw the waste into vats of lime or acid. He might have done something much worse, too. Okay, so surely someone must have been onto him. This was a man with a lot of skeletons in his closets, possibly literally as well as figuratively. But first, you need to know that during the time Holmes had met a man in Chicago named Benjamin F. Pitzel. Pitzel was no stranger to crime himself, but the jury's still out on whether these two became partners in crime. Holmes then met and married a woman named Minnie Williams. He was actually married to 3 women now, and there'd also be a 4th. After marrying Williams, he managed to get her to sign the deed to her property to a man that was just another alias of Holmes. The deed would eventually be signed over to another man who was an alias of Pitzel. And if that all looks suspicious, it was. Minnie's sister Annie went to Chicago to meet her sister and her mysterious new husband, and neither she nor her sister were ever seen again. They both likely became unwitting organ donors. To cover his tracks, Holmes wrote a letter to the girl's aunt signed by Annie that said things were going swimmingly and she and her sister were heading off to Europe. An actual, real letter was written much earlier to Minnie from Annie. In that missive, Minnie wrote that she'd met a man named Harry Gordon, whom she described as handsome, wealthy, and highly intelligent. Holmes would later tell cops that Minnie had killed Annie after the two of them had vied for his attention, but it's unlikely this was the case. What we know for sure is that Holmes had many relationships, some with the 150 young women who worked for him during those years. It's also true that when the World's Fair came to Chicago, there were a lot of missing persons cases. In 1893, things started to come undone for Holmes. He ripped off too many creditors, and some of them were after him. For that reason, he tried to claim on insurance for a fire at the building, which he actually started himself. The police now knew this guy had a bad reputation, and one investigator named F.G. Cowie looked into Holmes's past. The conclusion of the cop was something seemed awfully wrong about this educated fella. In 1894, Holmes already fled Chicago to go live in the house he'd scammed out of the Williams sisters. While there, he was jailed for trying to commit another scam. While in that jail, he told a man about a plan he had to take out a life insurance policy on himself and then fake his own death. He needed the guy's help, and if that was forthcoming, he'd cut the guy in on the scam. In the end, faking his own death didn't work and the other criminal didn't receive any money. It was then that Holmes turned to Pitzel again for help. He told him that he should fake his death. The plan was for Holmes to create an inventor named B.F. Perry, who was actually Pitzel. This guy would die in a lab experiment gone wrong, but the body that police would find would be a cadaver that Holmes had acquired. After that, Holmes and Pitzel would collect on the life insurance policy. Except Holmes, being Holmes, didn't want to share the loot, so one day he turned up at Pitzel's house, knocked him out with chloroform, and burned his body, making it look like an explosion had happened in the lab. Holmes was then in the money because he'd actually taken out a life insurance policy on the real Pitzel. Holmes went to Mrs. Pitzel's house and told her that her husband was doing some business in London, England. He told her that he could help take care of her 5 kids, of which 3 left that day with Holmes. The kids were never seen again. Holmes later said he forced 2 of them to get inside a large trunk. Once they were in, he made a hole and pumped gas in there through a hose. Not long after, an investigator was on the lookout for Holmes and the 3 missing kids. The cops discovered the remains of the girls at the house where Holmes was staying, and they found teeth and some chopped up bits of the boy in the chimney. The game was almost up. Investigators now started to put this man's life under a microscope. It didn't take long to understand that many people had gone missing who'd been unfortunate enough to cross his path. It's then they went to the castle and they made those grisly discoveries. What's worse, they found what looked like a rack. It was assumed by some that Holmes had used it to torture people into telling him what he wanted to know. It was also understood that for a while Holmes had been working on a theory. He believed that if you slowly stretched a body, it would become taller over time. He wrote that by doing this, humans could create a race of giants. It'll never be known if he actually stretched some of his victims in an attempt to see if he was right. On October 28, 1895, Holmes represented himself for the first day of his trial. It was said that he showed a remarkable familiarity with the law. Still, today a lot is uncertain about his crimes and his motives. The biggest number put forward is that he killed 200 people, although it's certain that he killed 9. He confessed to 27 murders, but then again, he told a lot of lies. May 7, 1896, the day of his execution by hanging. Holmes was said to have looked very calm. His neck didn't break immediately, so his body twitched for a good 15 minutes. After 20 minutes, he was pronounced dead. As for his final words, not long before he departed this world, he had asked if he could be buried deep under concrete. He was worried someone might steal his body and sell his organs. Now, you need to watch how Charles Manson came to lead one of the world's most dangerous cults, or have a look at this.